This is interesting. I like looking at this. The Linux desktop, you know, what is it? The year of the Linux desktop people always talk about. When is the year of the Linux desktop? I wouldn't fault Microsoft for Linux's shortcomings. That's the thing. I talk a lot about Microsoft lock in and how people like to move over to Linux, but it's really not Microsoft's doing. If anything, I think Microsoft is helping Linux adoption. Because I think back to what really made me switch in 2018. Yeah, there were some haters, and I kind of feed off negativity, and that's why I probably do as well as I do on YouTube. But I look back on that and I look at the adoption of Linux. I moved to Linux because Microsoft, I think it was around the time of 1803 and 1809, they're just terrible Windows updates, and it was just causing me all kinds of grief, whether it was at work from someone that for some odd reason had a laptop and I had to mess with it and it got updated to those versions. Um, it forced me. I was like, this update cycle that Microsoft is doing is just ungodly bad. I have to get a different operating system, and that's what drove me to Linux. There was nothing necessarily appealing for Linux desktop at the time because when we look at it, and from an IT professional, I've been in IT for 2 decades. Typically, this is how it works. I know I'm going to get some people upset here, but it's the day. This whole stream's been hot take after hot take. Why stop now? Really, here's how it works. In the Just as a general, let's paint with a pretty broad brush here. Linux does servers the best. You look at data centers, it's mostly going to be Linux servers running, whatever it might be. Linux servers typically what you run. I do, my forte is Windows servers, but I obviously still mess around a lot with Linux servers. So I preferred the Linux server because I knew it was just set it and forget it, and you didn't have to worry about updates and a lot of other shenanigans you did with Windows Server. So you always preferred Linux server. And then from your desktop, well, being in Windows, I just told you I've been in Windows since 1980s as a kid, and that's what I learned and grew up on, and I've been messing and tinkering around for that entire time. I know Windows front and back, and it just is very comfortable for me. No matter what Windows I'm in, I may not like it, but it's very comfortable. And that's just generally how things are. Most IT professionals prefer a Linux server, and then they prefer a Windows desktop because that's what we know. And that's typically yielded and netted the best results for us. And most times when you're working in business, you're having to mess with Active Directory and GPOs and other stuff. So when you're launching stuff out, it's usually going to be Windows devices, and it's easier if you're on Windows to just mess around and interface with those devices. Yes, I know you can do it in Linux, and I do that often with like Remmina and RDP and those things. But at the end of the day, most IT professionals really love Linux server, and at the end of the day, they're sitting on a Windows desktop. And that's just kind of how it is. It has nothing to do with Linux failing or Linux desktop failing. It's just there's not really that the lock-in is not what scares people away from Linux desktop. It's the fact Linux desktop is scary for most average users, or there's not that compatibility, or they don't know it and they don't want to learn it. I mean, all those things are true. And you'll see probably a newer generation come out where I think Mac is really starting to steal a ton of market share. You also have some Chromebook, and there's probably that same. I do see Linux gaining some popularity, but there's never really truly going to be the year of the Linux desktop because there's just not that mass market appeal. You got all these old people that aren't going to want to change. They're not going to learn a new operating system. The younger, soy latte drinking 20-year-olds out there going and getting their Starbucks, they're going to want their fancy MacBooks with the little Apple logo, and they're going to be Mac users. I get that. And there's going to be this younger generation that might even adopt the Chromebook mentality, which is kind of like a bastardized version of Linux. Well, it's actually a bastardized version of Gentoo Linux if we get real specific. But it's kind of like, that's where we're at. There's never really that Linux desktop, the year of the Linux desktops. not around the corner. It never been around the corner. It's still 1 or 2% of the population, and that's just where Linux will live. And it's, still there's always a spot for it, and there's definitely use cases. What I want to see with Linux is the things it does the best in, it should dominate. There should never be me walking by a blue screen of death at a kiosk, at a hotel, or an airport. No, like that should never happen. Those machines should be running Linux. And I don't, it boggles my mind in 2023 that is still a thing. Like, what the hell? Like, what are these kiosk companies doing? Reach out to me. I'll build that shit for free for you guys. You can kick me back royalties or whatever it is. We can work something out. I'll do it on the cheap, and I'll build you whatever program you want for a damn kiosk to show images or a directory. That's pretty simple. That's a very, very simplistic program. And the fact they run it on top of a Windows kernel blows my effing mind in 2023. Like, my gosh, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, no, there's never going to be the year of the Linux desktop, but there's things Linux does better than just anything else.